Did it work? Okay, yeah. It looked like it worked. Audience. Attention, audience. We're going to talk about abortion. The A word. Just wanted you to know. Now I lost my cue to the music. There we go. Is that it? Yeah, okay. From the studio in the bonus room above the garage on the north side of Cary, at the foot of Mount Belzoni, this is the Triangle Talk Show. This is going to be episode 52. It is March 11th, 2019. Yes, we are going to talk about abortion. No Mo Roe. Oh no. I think that deserves clickbait. I think. I'm taking no chances. There's clickbait. I think. We'll see. Maybe not. So we'll talk about that in just a minute. Before we start, I just finished listening to an episode of Stay Tuned with Preet Bharara's excellent podcast. And he was talking to South Bend Mayor, 37-year-old South Bend Mayor, and newly announced Democratic presidential candidate, Pete Buttigieg. I gave myself the phonetics and I didn't read it. Buttigieg, spelled funny. Buttigieg doesn't have a snowball's chance in hell of winning this round. He's laying the groundwork for a future run. The only reason I'm mentioning it is because it's an interesting conversation. At least at this point, Buttigieg does not engage in a lot of the typical politician doublespeak. He doesn't dodge, he doesn't redirect, he doesn't take a question and then ignore it and then make his speech. So he's an interesting guy to listen to right now. He'll learn all those techniques down the road. But it was a fun, an interesting conversation. Maybe the most interesting thing that I got out of it was the yin and yang about practicality versus principles. Do you vote for somebody who might be able to win, or do you vote your principles and hope the person still carries it off and doesn't end up losing just because he's too far out there? His point on that was that the practicality argument, which is one that I kind of find myself, the camp I find myself sitting in a lot, doesn't tend to win that well because it doesn't create much engagement. It doesn't activate people. Nobody, it's kind of ho-hum. Yeah, they'll probably win. Hillary, probably win. And then sometimes they don't. The more engaging candidate brings people out. Well, that's the argument. I don't know how often it's true. I'm sure sometimes it is and sometimes it's not. I always recommend listening to Stay Tuned with Preet because he's does an awesome podcast. None of that yelling stuff. Okay, here on my Skype line, I have a guest. Robin Marty is a fair to call you a journalist, writer?
I'll accept that.
Journalist, activist, and you are on the abortion beat, I think. Let me put your title up here. Is also fair that you're on the abortion beat?
Yes,
okay.
Very much so.
And you have a new book out. It's called The Handbook for a Post-Roe America. Marty, I'm going to give you the clickbait title on that too. But you can't hear it. The audience is hearing klaxons go off. We're not hearing it, but they hear that. I don't know. Is that fair? Is that
to say it's clickbaity?
Yeah.
No, I think it's completely and utterly, it's true. I would be inclined to say that by 2021, Roe will be overturned.
Okay, so that's the basis for the conversation here. You're going to be at the Flyleaf Books in Chapel Hill this Friday at 6:30.
That is not. Yes, that is what we.
That's what we think.
Where I'm going to be. We hope that that's where I'll be.
Yeah. We think you're going to be there and promoting the book and talking about it. You make a speech at these events, or?
I don't usually. People always ask me why I decided to do the book, and I did the book primarily because it's When people heard that Roe was probably about to be overturned, especially once Kennedy announced that he was retiring from the Supreme Court, the instant reaction from everyone was, okay, abortion's going to start becoming illegal again. I need to buy emergency contraception, and I need to give money to Planned Parenthood. And as soon as I heard both of those things, my first thought was, no, don't do either of those. That's probably the least effective way to get ready for the end of Roe. If you really want to keep abortion clinics open, Planned Parenthood is not the place to donate, because in a lot of states that only have one clinic, those are not Planned Parenthood clinics. Getting a bunch of emergency contraception seems like a good idea, but you're taking it off of the shelves for people who really need it. You can get emergency contraception for yourself, but you don't stockpile. That's just not the way to do it. And there are other groups on the ground that can be doing this for you. So it was a reaction to all of these people who suddenly realized that abortion is going to be illegal, not just inaccessible like it's been for so many people for so long, especially marginalized communities and communities of color and communities in rural areas. It was going to be completely illegal for everyone. And so this was just a way to tell people, here is where you can better put your energies to make sure that we are in as good of a situation as possible when this happens.
I have been, you're on the media tour, and you've done a lot of shows. I don't know, this may be the smallest show you've done, little backyard podcast. I've listened to a few of them. I haven't had a long time to absorb what you've been saying, but some of what I've got is that it's not a done deal. The idea that, elections have consequences. We elected Trump. Trump appointed Kavanaugh. Kavanaugh will probably vote against some of the cases that are coming up that could either overturn or chip away at Roe. But that's not necessarily a done deal. And you've got in this book other things to do.
Right. It's not a done deal, but if you ask me, I actually think we would be in a better situation if Roe is overturned. If Roe is overturned and abortion is completely illegal, my guess is at least 15 states it will be completely illegal, and then there'll be another 10 or so in which it will be almost entirely illegal. But that would be a change that nobody could ignore. Whereas if we saw abortion stay technically legal all throughout the United States, but then we saw heartbeat bans that go into effect, or a state with no clinic, something like that, that's not as immediate of a danger. And so people won't react as well to it. They'll still say, well, we're kind of safe. Because the reality is, especially since 2010, abortion has been almost completely inaccessible for a large part of our community in the United States. Having Roe end is a wake-up call that makes everybody have to pay attention. And we should have been paying attention for the last 10 years at least, but ever since the Hyde Amendment passed in 1976 and has been re-upped every single year in Congress. This has been a problem. Roe was not the right solution, and now we have a chance maybe to lose it, and hopefully it'll kind of galvanize us politically and we can start over with something better.
Roe is not the right solution.
Roe is not the right solution.
That may be the first time I've heard anybody say that. Roe is held up on banners at marches.
It is, but Roe has always been about the idea of not putting doctors in jail for performing abortions. What we need to do as we start looking at how our new landscape will look is we need to look at, does abortion belong behind gatekeepers, basically? Should abortion only be available to the people who have money to be able to access it? Does abortion need to be offered in ways that only come through clinics? Should you have to go see a doctor in order to do an abortion? These are all questions that are really coming up now that we have the technology to be able to do telemedicine, that we have clinics that are inundated with protesters, and that we've seen medical costs skyrocket. There are easier, cheaper, and very safe ways to do abortion that don't necessarily need to be done within the regulations that we have in place. So maybe if Roe is gone, we can come up with a better framework like the one that is happening in New York right now, where abortion is simply uncriminalized. If it's uncriminalized for everyone, doctors and for the people who decide to take abortion into their own hands, then that is a much better situation than this Roe ruling that says doctors can perform abortions at such and such a time.
I won't pretend to be an expert on how Roe works. I am a relatively late to the party, even though I'm real old, late to the party activist type person. And so I'm not an expert on this. Let's spend a little bit of time setting the stage and how things work right now and how we get to where you want to go.
Okay, well, for instance, right now, let's take North Carolina. North Carolina has, I believe, 7 clinics in the state, primarily in 4 different cities. So for a large part of North Carolina, you would have to actually come into a city in order to get an abortion. I believe North Carolina has a 72-hour wait, although or maybe that's South Carolina. I get my Carolinas mixed up.
I think you're right.
It is a 72-hour wait, but that you don't need to see a doctor face-to-face. But what that means is that from the point in which you realize you're pregnant, you then have to call up a clinic, schedule an appointment, do some sort of mandatory consent over the telephone. You would then have to wait at least 72 hours before you could actually come into a clinic. There is the expense of driving to a clinic if you're not already in the city. There's at least $500 of medical expenses that comes from just an early trimester abortion. And all of that is still on top of the fact that you have to get past protesters, and you have to do it before 14 weeks, I believe, is the legal cutoff in North Carolina before you have to go into a hospital in order to get care. So you have basically about 8 weeks from the point in which you become pregnant to make sure that you can navigate all of this, get the money together, because in North Carolina, your insurance is not going to cover an abortion, get into a clinic, get taken care of, don't get scared away by protesters, which is a huge problem, especially in Charlotte and Raleigh. You do all of that, and then you can finally end your pregnancy and go home. Whereas if we have a different situation, there is no reason why a person couldn't call up a medical professional, say, I know my period is, say, 2 weeks late. Can you give me medication? And they send medication in the mail to your home, and you would be able to do an abortion at home that way and call up a medical professional if you believe you're having any sort of complications. It would be cheaper. It would be far easier. There's no reason why this can't be happening other than the fact that the legislature already passed a bill that bans telemedicine abortion in your state.
Yeah, that's what they call the medically induced, or the pill patients, or the what the other escorts that I work with talk about. And I do that. I escort at an abortion clinic here in Raleigh, and I do that a couple days a week. I see the protesters. I think we're pretty mild around here compared to what I've heard about in other areas. During the week, we have some folks that just kind of count their rosaries, and they'll approach cars and try to redirect or misdirect the people. And that's what I'm there for. On the weekends, it gets a little more raucous, but I think it's mild still compared to other parts of the country.
And it's still mild right now in Raleigh, but for instance, if you go to Charlotte, Charlotte is one of the clinics there usually every weekend has a parade that happens in front of their clinic. And that parade, I believe last week was 500 people, they said. And when it gets to the end of their 40 weeks that they do this parade, there'll be as many as a few thousand people that come and circle the clinic. When that happens, a person cannot get in to get care. And that is the problem. That is the problem with clinics being the center and the only place where abortion care is made.
So how do we get to the step you want to get to, where we're not talking, I think what you said was we're not talking about decriminalizing it. We're talking about making it completely legal. Is that the same thing?
Sort of, but not entirely. There's different ways that we can go about doing it, especially in states where legislatures are a lot more conservative. And one of the ways that I have been pushing is a model legislation that was created by a group called Public Leadership Institute. And the idea of the bill is simply that, especially if abortion is illegal, but even if it isn't, there's an idea that anti-abortion protesters always say, whatever happens, we have no intention of putting the pregnant person in jail. They always say, we're always interested in providers, we are not interested in mothers. So this bill is simply a Pregnant Person Protection Act. And what it does is it says that because we know that there are a lot of indiscrepancies and racial disparities in healthcare, because we know that it is harder for people who are poor to be able to access prenatal care and preventative health care in general, and because we know that no person should ever be investigated because of a pregnancy that does not turn out to be successful, that there will be no arrests, no investigations, nothing like that when it comes to a person who has a pregnancy that does not have a good result. And this is a bill that would protect not just people who might have tried to induce their own abortion, but also people who simply miscarry and then, because of their personal circumstances, find that doctors might suspect them of having done an abortion, or people who might be struggling with drug addiction and have premature labors because of it, people who didn't have any access to health care or didn't know they were pregnant and then end up having a miscarriage because of it. It protects all people who are able to get pregnant to say no pregnant person should ever be put in jail because she happened to not give a live birth. And this is something that should be able to be easily embraced, even in conservative states who say that they value their mothers. This should be embraced everywhere, and if it were passed, it would protect everyone.
So this is a state-by-state plan, and you're not trying to get back to the Supreme Court and once again reinstate Roe were it to be overturned?
I think obviously if there is a way to have a federal protection for all pregnant people, regardless of whether it's abortion or anything else, that's the best way to do. But I don't honestly believe that the federal government is ever going to save us again. It's the same approach that I take to activism in general. I don't think that national organizations are going to be able to help us at this point. When abortion rights started to disappear, it disappeared state by state by state. It disappeared because of national right to life chapters that worked together. It disappeared because of model legislation that came through Americans United for Life. It disappeared because of the Tea Party wave in 2010. And it was stripped one state at a time. And that's how power always works. And that's how we have to try and get our power back. When we go try and fix things on the ground, it's not going to work to do the same thing over again, to give all of our resources, all of our money, all of our volunteer times to national organizations, and then just hope that it'll trickle into the states that we need it the most. Instead, we need to be investing at a local level, whether it's time or finances, to make sure that we are best using our resources that way. Local communities know what their own communities need. There's less waste and there's less go-between.
And ultimately, you must be talking about influencing legislators.
Oh, yeah.
So it's more legislators, less courts.
It's more legislators, less courts, and it's also being smart about what kind of legislation we're defending and where we're doing it at. For instance, when you started this podcast, you were talking about the mayor of South Bend running for president. I'm actually a really big fan of his, and I'm a big fan of his because he did something really important in South Bend, Indiana, which is when Whole Women's Healthcare was trying to open a South Bend abortion clinic that provided just medication abortion. The city council said no and refused to do a zoning, and he overruled their zoning ordinance. So he was responsible for the option of them being able to open up this clinic, even though the city council was saying no. This is what I mean about working where you have the most power, and city councils have so much power when it comes to the ability to keep abortion accessible. City councils can make noise ordinances that will help keep protesters at bay. City councils can make sure that zoning passes so that clinics can open, or that they don't change zoning ordinances in order to close clinics. We're watching right now in Nashville that CareFem has just opened up a new clinic there that is going to be abortion care, and at this point it's only medication abortion. and they were going to try and do non-medication abortion through the first trimester there as well. The city council said, we're going to rezone that property so that you can't do that, and abortion can only happen in a business district. City councils have so much power when it comes to abortion, because now that we have almost no clinics, a lot of times, especially as Roe keeps abortion legal in red states, you'll see blue areas that are the only places where clinics exist. If conservatives are running these city councils, or even just abortion opponents that might be liberal, they can easily close a clinic far more quickly than a state law can. So using your power at its most concentrated on the most local level is always going to be the best route.
Yeah, I think you're right. North Carolina has clinics in Raleigh, Greensboro, and Charlotte, and almost nothing between Raleigh and the coast. I think maybe nothing between Raleigh and the coast.
Yeah.
And I meet people that have driven for hours to get to the clinic that I escort at. Can I ask personal questions?
Of course.
Have you ever had an abortion?
I have not had an abortion. I had a DNC in 2009 after I discovered I had a missed miscarriage, which means that I was pregnant and believed that the pregnancy was progressing. But it turned out when I went in for a 12-week checkup that I had actually lost the fetus a few weeks earlier, and there was no heartbeat. And that's part of what kind of led me to this activism, because when I found that out, I found out that my doctor did not know how to do a DNC. So I was forced to try and call up other doctors and find somebody who was able to do that operation so that I could finally get the pregnancy over with. And that was the moment where I thought, okay, now I think I finally understand what it's like to have a pregnancy you don't want, and nobody can do anything for you until you have a medical gatekeeper let you through this process.
So you do have a personal connection.
I have a personal connection. Also, I kind of tell people, though, that to the other side, I'm considered pro-life, because my third pregnancy was completely unintended and not entirely wanted. And when it came down to it, I decided that I was going to go ahead and give birth, and that's how I got my second son. So I can be kind of complicated. I tell them that I'm pro-life because for me, I did not want an abortion, and I'm pro-choice because I believe that any person who wants one should be able to do it easily and with no restrictions.
Have you gotten to know women who have gone through that difficult decision?
Oh, I know lots of people who have had abortions, but a lot of them don't consider it to have been that difficult of a decision. When they realized they were pregnant, they knew pretty much right away, this is not the right time. This is not the right person. This is not the right circumstances. And I don't know. I mean, many of them will say that they regret the fact that they got pregnant, but nobody has ever told me they regretted their abortion.
I realized as I was saying those words that they were loaded in a way I didn't want them to load them. Give me a little bit more on the things that a woman goes through when she discovers she's pregnant and maybe doesn't want to be.
Well, I think for the most part, I think most people probably kind of have a plan. I don't think most pregnant people, when they find themselves pregnant, haven't thought beforehand what they were going to do. It just doesn't. Maybe, I don't know, maybe other people do. But to me, the decision is obviously a very personal one. It's a very private one. But one of the things, I spend a lot of time talking to abortion opponents. That's one of the things that I do in my reporting. And when it's kind of a given that they're always going to sit down and try and do the conversion thing, or, well, Robin, what if it's a baby here? What if it's a baby here sort of thing? And one of the things that I always tell them is that you can go through all of the pro-life apologetics that you want. You can do the, okay, well, if it's okay to have an abortion at this point, what about a week later? Or if it's a baby when it comes out, what about 2 minutes later when it's in? All of these shticks that they do in order to talk somebody into a corner, like, you can do it until you're blue in the face, and I might even agree with you on a lot of it, but when it comes down to actually having an unwanted pregnancy, that's not science, that's emotion. And that is a point in which every person is going to react in a different way. And for a lot of them, they will decide, this is not a pregnancy that I can I can go through with. It's the reason why we always see people who are religious or people who identify as pro-life, they still come to abortion clinics and they still end their pregnancies, because as soon as it's yours and it's real, then it's no longer just a game of logistics and rhetoric. It's real.
My personal philosophy is that I see the situation between a woman and an unborn child as rights in conflict. At some point, both of them have certain rights, and they are in opposition if the woman is thinking about having an abortion. And for a period of time, the woman's rights trump the unborn child's. And the longer the pregnancy goes on, the more the balance shifts, and at some point, perhaps it shifts in favor of the unborn child. Is there a point? First of all, does that make sense to you? And is there a point where you would say? Is there a point where you would say you waited too long?
Yes, but I also know that I can't judge a person. It's very hard to understand what another person is going through and what's going on in their own personal situation. I think that if the framework of Roe were allowed to simply exist as it was, that we would be in a situation where, yes, third trimester abortions shouldn't happen unless there's a fetal anomaly or some sort of health risk. I think that would be an ideal situation.
With all the chipping away that's happened in state by state, right?
Yeah, and the reality is the fact that the people who are right now saying, okay, third trimester abortion is always horrible and it's infanticide and such and so forth, they're the people who are making it impossible to get an abortion early and safe when a person wants it as soon as they want it. And so I can't not fight for third trimester abortion rights in a world where people are making it impossible to get an abortion in the first trimester.
Yeah, it's disingenuous from them.
Mm-hmm.
All right. You got to go, unfortunately. We can do this for a long time, I think. I don't have the time.
We will on Friday.
Yeah. I think I'll try to come out. On Friday at Flyleaf Books in Chapel Hill at 6:30, if everything goes according to plan.
Hopefully.
Yep. And the book you've got out now is Handbook for a Post-Roe America. You had one before that.
I did. It was called Crow After Roe. It was tracking all of the different bills that were model legislation that were supposed to overturn Roe. It was in 2013. It was a little bit ahead of its time. We published it, and then even more bills happened, and everything kind of got out of control. So actually what's going on is I'm in the process of revising that right now and updating it, and that will be out August 27th, and this time it will be called The End of Roe v. Wade.
Okay, and the crow is just reference to Jim Crow.
It was, and it was a really problematic title, and I regret that a lot.
Oh, do I need to click the clickbait thing again? I'll do that. There we go. It didn't run. Try again. There we go. Okay, there, Crow After Roe also qualifies for clickbait. Handbook is a handbook. It's things you can do yourself as you face more difficulty in getting an abortion if you want one. We got that right?
That is exactly what it is.
All right. And you are, and put the title up again, Robin Marty. And after, on Saturday, I think you're going to be in Charlotte. So your North Carolina tour.
Yes.
And people can go see you there. And on the Triangle Talk Show website for this episode, there'll be a lot of links to many of the other programs that you've talked on, different subjects, greater length. Well, all kind of the same subject, but a greater length, and from hosts that are far better than me. So, Robin, thank you very much for stopping by the Triangle Talk Show, and on to the next show.
And thanks so much for having me, Gary.
Okay, bye-bye. And I'm going to push the hang up button and talk to the audience a little bit more. So thanks, bye. All right. Wow. I wish we could have gone longer. It would have been great. But like I say, on the Triangle Talk Show, she has done a lot of media interviews. I'm grateful that she decided to do this little podcast from the bonus room above the garage. She's written for Rolling Stone. She's written for major publications. And it's, again, a bunch of links. Can I look at the links? I think I can. Yeah. let's see. She's got her own blog spot. She's been on a podcast for NARAL, The Nation, Bitch Media, Tom Hartman program. She's written in Rolling Stone. She's got a Patreon if you want to help support her. Interview from the LA Review of Books from the Huffington Post. From the Matthew Flipowicz Show on YouTube. And her own podcast. She started her own podcast. It's called Ask an Anti. And that language is slightly coded. At least it's sort of an insider language for those of us that do abortion escorting, the folks that stand on the other side of the street or on the sidewalk at the edge of the driveway or right outside the door, depending on what the laws are. We call them antis. Anti-abortion, basically, is their deal. Anti-abortion protesters. They will always say, we're not protesters. We care. We're here to help you. They do have an agenda. So she has a first episode of that. Once again, it's going to be on the link is going to be on the Triangle Talk Show website, where she is talking to one of those people and getting their point of view. And she said, I'm not sure how long ago she did that podcast. She said if she gets good feedback on it, she'll do some more. She is not a professional podcaster, but she's got some things to learn. And then I'll also put a link to the Stay Tuned with Preet, with Pete Buttigieg, as the bottom end of the list of links for the show. I saw a little kitty, saw some kitty ears in the background from Robin. So good on you, Robin. Thank you very much. And that will be it for this episode of the Triangle Talk Show. No Mo Roe. Oh no. My clickbait going to work? Yeah. All right. See you later. Over and out.